A warm welcome to the Respectful Net Theater channel. Today is the 3rd of March 2022. Our today's episode is about performing Be-in, a psychedelic fascination history of digital cultures since the 1960s. Our guests are OMSK Social Club, described as an empathy training group working in collaborative and immersive sessions on speculations for other world orders. Inke Arns, curator and directrice of Hartware Medienkunstverein Dortmund, running currently the exhibition Technoshamanism. And Martin Donner, scholar in media studies and cultural education, University of Erlangen-Nürnberg, and an award-winning electronic composer. He's a specialist for psychedelic concepts and practices within the counterculture's neo-avantgarde of the 1960s. The episode is hosted by me, Martina Leeker, a scholar in media studies and theater studies and a performer. Before going deeper into our topic, let me shortly introduce the Respectful Net Theater channel to you. This project by Judith Ackermann, Anusha Gosalka, Kai Tuchmann and myself attempts to understand the role of theater and performance in and for digital cultures. We do so in conversation with artists from theater and performance and scholars from the humanities or technical sciences. On the other side, we are also exploring very practically the performative possibilities and regimes of digital environments. This becomes concrete, for example, on our so-called digital stage on TikTok. Back to our topic. Performing Be-in leads us to an extremely important and not yet deeply explored fascination history of digital cultures. A significant and vivid example for performing Be-in is the performance group and commune USCO, that is to say, Us Company, founded in the early 1960s by the poet Gerd Stern in the USA. USCO came up with the notion of Be-in, describing their immersive and psychedelic multimedia shows using colorful flickering lights, rapid image projections, electroacoustic sounds, and symbols of Buddhism. The effects of these performances had been described in the Life magazine in 1966 as drug-like experiences, lifting into, as it goes, states of heightened consciousness. For USCO, the Be-in stood for producing a togetherness of the participants in which they should experience themselves as part of a larger whole, being connected to everything through a common swinging of the deepest and psychophysical levels. Furthermore, USCO had very clear ideas concerning the political impact of their psychedelics. They should lead to an anti-authoritarian form of socio-political organization in which all people are enabled by technology to gather freely and without any kind of political, moral, or physical suppression and hierarchies. This was materialized also by a larger movement of the US-American counterculture, the hippies, which withdrew, as USCO did, to the countryside, building communes. In today's ubiquitous and pervasive digital cultures, we see again performances of this desire for techno-human beings. The artistic work of OMSK Social Club is a significant and brilliant example. For better understanding, we propose to think about two questions. Does, and if yes, in which way today's performing Be-in relate to its prehistory? And which role might contemporary performing Be-ins have within the totalizing connectivity of today's digitality? To discuss these questions, three aspects of the fascination history of Be-ins could be leading. The first aspect refers to the epistemology and knowledge of Be-in, standing for a history that is constituted by affects, psychedelics, rituality, and anti-rationalism, showing that there is a Western fascination history, referring to forms of cultural experience and existence as myth, rituals, animism, emotionality, or spiritual and even spiritist practices. However, it is questionable if the fascination history, including vital psychophysical aspects and the state of being in non-knowledge and drug-like bedazzling, is necessarily for the better. The second aspect refers to the subjectivity of the Be-ins and its politics. As media scholar Fred Turner puts it, the counterculture builds a specific combination of individualism and a regime of exclusion. The starting point is that the performing Be-in is also a social form executed by, as Turner says, a white middle class living in communes, excluding diversity and equality, organizing themselves around leaders and fixing women in traditional functions of care. The effect is that the fight against authoritarian structures and unequal sociality provokes the very same. Following Fred Turner, a mentality of using technology instead of politics to solve problems came up with this exclusive and technophilic socio setting, preparing a hubristic world-building individual, the technophile New Right movement in the USA, as well as the technocratic spirit of Silicon Valley. Thirdly, today it becomes obvious that the countercultural critique and practices of performing Be-in became a future business. Psychedelic, bedazzling techno aesthetics are all around us. Furthermore, being in an always hyper-connectedly status is the credo of digital cultures. The most activist ideas and practices became perhaps the best business. The challenge, and at the same time, the chance is that this fascination history is full of ambivalences, which is constitutive for digital culture's conversion into techno-human entanglements. On the one side, the Be-ins may enable a mentality for more equal societies and evoke modesty for the ruined Mother Earth by opening up people's mind for a deep togetherness. On the other side, they may lead to an adaptation to the techno-human cooperativity in digital cultures, making humans voluntarily and obedient givers of data for artificial intelligence and assistance for care technologies. We are very happy to discuss these aspects and ambivalences with our guests, which are experts for our topic. The work of OMSK Social Club is our point of reference, as it is about, quote, a radical experiment at the intersection of art, politics, and life, end quote, and has been described as, I quoted in the beginning, an empathy training camp. The work with collective role-playing as live action role-play lab, integrating rave culture and using decentralized cryptocurrency in order to build equal, open-minded, and diverse collectives. The aim is to use the experience of this collectivity and its visceral reactions for building up a more democratic use of technology, dissolving egomaniac subjects and building equal groups. Inke Arns is a specialist, between many other things, for the history and presence of the combination of animist and shamanistic practices and concepts with technology, which are entangled in today's artworks for healing the earth. This is shown in her exhibition Technoshamanism, which builds an important frame to discuss the role and relevance, as well as the ambivalences of performing Be-in. And Martin Donner comes in as a media scholar undertaking research in digitalization of cultural education, the pro and contra of cybernetics, artificial intelligence, art and media, and history of science. His expertise for our today's episode comes from his research on the countercultures of the USA, especially of the art and action group Merry Pranksters, around the writer Ken Kense, which traveled through the country with an old school bus, organizing parties and giving out LSD. Martin asks for the interventionist and transformative potentials of this group. We will start now with short inputs by our guests, beginning with OMSK, followed by Inke, and then Martin, and then after this, coming to our discussion. A warm welcome to our guests. I'm very happy to have you with us. And I give over to OMSK Social Club.
Thank you so much, Martina, especially for the warm introduction. I think that for the input from OMSK, I'm going to speak a little bit to what we actually do, and then also highlight a specific project, which I think very much touches on this idea of how psychedelics or how kind of transpersonal and interconnected togetherness can react to our socio-political modern day world. So in terms of Social Club, it's very much a roaming collective. It sprawls and recoils depending on its form or output. It was established around 2016 and performs itself as a facilitator of role-playing environments inside the contemporary art world. As an artist group, we work closely with a network of core and public players. Everything that we create is unique and unrehearsed when it comes to the live immersive experience. And the game designs typically take precedence, and then we have a number of kind of installational relics or keys that come out of these virtual egos or popular experiences or political phenomena that very much articulate our material of worlding in terms of immersive role-play. We often try to think of these works as dematerialized hybrid modern day cultures, where they actually sit alongside the viewer or participant's unique personal experience. In the past, Social Club has introduced and played within landscapes and topics such as the ontology of the avatar. Often our works are situated within rave culture, touching on the notion of survivalism, both through a meta and constructed viewpoint, but also deal with terminology like catfishing, desire and sacrifice, positive trading, algorithmic strategies, and decentralized cryptocurrency as autonomous organization. In a sense, though, what Social Club does, which is kind of different to traditional modes of roleplay or LARP, live action roleplay, is that a lot of these worlds that OMSK terraforms is very much pitted inside this place called Bleed, which is half consensual reality, our kind of everyday, and half fiction, and this kind of space in between, this doorway or hallway, this liminal tension between the two of imaginative and lived is like very much where we place our works, which is known as Bleed as a concept within roleplay. And it's this kind of, osmosis channel. The works that we propose and the kind of contents and makings is in a sense a sort of post-political entertainment in an attempt to shadow play politics until the game ruptures the surface we now know as life. This is really where we kind of utilize this tool of Bleed, because in most of the role-played worlds, Bleed is a very highly disputed tool and actually is quite often not encouraged or cultivated. The phenomenon known as Bleed occurs when emotions from a character or the effect of a player out of game or vice versa, such as when they affect the character in game to an uncontrollable point that they cannot return to reality in the same state they left it. Now, this is very much impetus for the works that we create, because they really sort of sit on a kind of maybe like sort of a plate between these two existences, of like one that we're experiencing every day and the other that is a potentially lived reality or speculative fiction. And what was really interesting about utilizing or positioning work on this kind of ever shifting plateau is that in a way you can take things back from this imagined world and you can also bring things in. So it's kind of actually is very much a landscape of kind of import and export that utilizes or at least kind of crafts the ecology of this. And this kind of brings up all sorts of questions about, you know, reality, who has the authority to make reality, is a collective hallucination actually a move towards consensual reality? Do we believe in the fact that, you know, everything is a hallucination and when we agree it's called reality? And a lot of these kind of tropes, I think, are often very palpably attached to both the psychedelic and also counterculture movement. And in a sense, I think also what's really interesting about these toolings is that they don't reduce society to purely economy or capital. In fact, they very much refuse these systems in order to attempt to kind of bring about a certain dynamic healing through the kind of invocation that's enacted through embodied knowledge. And also, I think very interestingly, they play quite heavily, and I think this is also true to psychedelic use, to the idea of sacrifice, sacrificing the lived world. And of course, like the kind of etymology of sacrifice is actually to make something sacred. And this, in a way, had sort of ad libs on this reproductive imagination and how far this can take us. But I mean, of course, a lot of those questions really resume or end in this notion of like, well, what is real? Well, in a sense, everything is real to the person who experiences it. Even role play is real if we take that in terms of real to mean an authentic experience. And this idea of real and what we can learn from bastardizing it is really where OMSK Social Club starts, and why we create fictive and alternative worlds to live inside, and why we really kind of argue bleed, and for all the works that are played inside these bleed zones, because in a sense, this tool of bleed is very much about compassion, solidarity, release, othering, and those feelings should not be immortal, of course, or absolute after they've been conceived by the user, the player, the viewer. Instead, we should really see these spaces of bleed as a point of departure beyond the moment of kind of extreme emotional manifestation. And that's also very much why the work sits inside the art world. There's something really enchanting about the way that art allows for a slowing down, a position of reflection, a position of dissemination, and that kind of dosage that art allows to take the experience one step beyond living it and in a one-to-one copy. Of course, we do understand all of our artworks to be illusions, and all illusions to be synthetic by their very nature of being illusions. But what happens when you kind of create this consensual collective hallucination? If more than one person believes in it, does it cease to exist as an illusion and become a shared thought? And of course, we can't even begin to answer this question with any sort of rationale, naturally, because the idea of belief is irrational by its very structure. And a belief is not just about deeming something real or not, it's about power, value, societal archetypes, identity politics, and of course, economy. And I think, in a sense, hopefully that kind of gives you a little bit of an introduction as to why we create the works that we do. In terms of like how they kind of manifest, it's typically a call for participants, then a handbook is delivered, which maps out the world. Then we have this very long workshop, and then we go into this live immersive work, which can last between 8 hours to the longest work was 58 days, non-stop. And then after this, we have debriefs, we come out of the work. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes artifacts are then taken further into the exhibition space. But under the context of the Be-ins and really what Martina laid out, I really wanted to talk about one specific work, which is called Utopias. And it was a work that was created last summer. And the structure of the work actually very much began with a intention which was coming from this group called the Utopias Freedom Cell. And what typically creates some works is that there's always this kind of like prologue or this introduction. And so I just want to read that to you now. Utopians. Well, let me start at the beginning. The 1960s saw the genesis limbs of both the psychedelic movement and the birth of computing technology. Timothy Leary, the pioneer of the former and influential advocator of the latter, in the 90s declared the PC is the LSD of the 90s. And so Utopias aim to unpack the thinking of this by traversing backwards into the analog technology of LSD in order to uproot new and alternative modes of thinking about technology today. The group, Utopias Freedom Cell, explored, and well still does, the profound and pervasive influence that LSD has on contemporary technological culture. Its aim was to begin to understand the many ways in which the modern world has found itself on drugs. I don't mean here street drugs, I mean psychopharmaceutical enhancement technology, virtual reality, augmented reality, etc., etc. We are drugged. It's well known when you follow the drug trail that psychoactive substances have been integral to the building of new economies, politics, media, and of course, code. Drugs are culture. They have also influenced art, poetry, philosophy, and therapy, opening up debates on neurochemistry of a human brain, which, like its subcultures, have never really been drug-free. Signed off by the Utopias Freedom Cell. And so this is kind of the introduction to this world, like the kind of front door, let's say. And from this, a group of 8 practitioners who belong to the core group of OMSK Social Club actually created an 8-hour role-playing session where they consumed LSD and basically explored what LSD could be under the influence of researchers, technologists, and thinkers who are basically trying to unravel the experience to find out the kind of notion of what it is as a primal technology. And these experiments very much centered around the thematics of understanding acid as a primal technology and the tab as a console for another world. And the work used the material substance of concentrated LSD to open up this kind of collective performance of artificially induced virtual reality. The users explored the collective mind made neurocosmic through social intelligence, technological extensions, and the radical holographic imagineering that lends itself to such chemicals. From this, we produced a sound score, which was actually from, whilst we were going on this trip, we were all mic'd up. So every single conversation and word that was uttered between the 8 practitioners was actually recorded. And we mixed that down into a 1-hour soundtrack that utilized and offered a kind of, I guess, evidence of some of the conversations that were explored under the influence of both role play and acid. And in a sense, it was really quite interesting, because also what happened was the line between what was played and who was being played was very, very slim, because of course LSD as a trope is a kind of benevolent or unreliable narrator. It was a character that was also materializing inside these players' bodies. From this, we actually then created a very large-scale installation that was shown at the Ljubljana Biennial, which also included creating a sentient telegram bot with an AR component that allowed some of the tropes and conversations that were brought about by the original roleplay to be explored from the viewer. And we're actually been lucky enough to now be awarded funding to basically write a book about alternative genealogies of virtual reality. So moving away from the kind of heavy dependency of the white male dominated Silicon Valley, but instead looking at all the other interests or phenomena that have circled both virtual and augmented reality, from these very early kind of specters and use of avatars to people like Sun Ra, who were using vibrational scores and orchestras and really believing that these were transmissions, and also the use of sci-fi with like Octavia Butler's cautionary tales, how, in a sense, Silicon Valley is purely a fan fiction of William Gibson, made real from neuromancia. What does it mean to shapeshift or utilize, even from very, very basic technologies, like thinking about, you know, the Xerox machine really changed the whole struggle in terms of like Black Panthers being able to disseminate their voice before, you know, early message boards even could possibly be thought of through the internet, where taking a body to the street is a certain set of dangers allowed to it. And yeah, really kind of looking at these kind of trajectories, or thinking about the timeline of virtual reality and the kind of interpersonal compositions of how we got there, as actually being far more rooted within the past and within maybe like much more mimetic structures, alongside all the kind of amazing thoughts around things like LSD or psilocybin, like through thinkers like Terence McKenna, who believes that, you know, aliens are very much here, but they are speaking to us through these drugs, and that is in fact our ingestion, is our way of communing with them. And yeah, so I think I think there's like so much to unpack in terms of these subjects, and I think that they're very much the kind of roots or foundations of a lot of Social Club's works, and really begin to, the worlds that we create very much are sort of rise-ons from these already existing countercultural movements, and maybe a re-examination of them, or a sort of hyper-performance with the interest to bring back evidence or chronicles from them. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. also for making this direct link to the prologue and the topic of LSD, counterculture, and so on. It's very rich input. Thanks a lot. Now I would ask Inke to give her input.
Yes, thank you very much. That was indeed a very rich input. I try to be less rich, okay, and I'll try to be a bit shorter. But there were so many things, and I have to say I'm really happy to meet you for the first time. OMSK Social Club. I was always intrigued by your interesting name, which I would like to also know more about, but maybe later for the discussion. And what you just said about the Xerox machine is really interesting. Just today I saw a big exhibition also featuring Polke, and contextualizing his work, which was very much influenced by the Xerox machine, I would say, and of course printing techniques, and contextualizing his work in the context of, let's say, contemporary artists, which was extremely interesting. Just something that popped up in my mind. I would like to briefly guide you through our current exhibition, the Technoshamanism exhibition, which is going to come to an end on Sunday, 6th of March. There's still time. Dortmund is not far. And also, of course, the publication is out. We publish magazines for every show we do at HMKV. So the publication is, on the one hand side, it's a printed magazine, 200-page magazine, but also a free PDF, which you can download on our website. So the exhibition started really, I think, around 2019, when I was approached by the two main curators of this NRW-wide, the statewide festival of Beuys 2021. So Joseph Beuys would have turned 100 years last year. And the two curators approached me and said, well, we would like HMKV and you to be part of that. And I just said, but you know what we are doing, right? And they said, yes, we know what you're doing. I said, I'm not going to make a Beuys exhibition, I'm sorry. There's other places that can do it, that are much more, that can do it much better, museums and the like. But what I would like to do is an exhibition that looks at techno-shamanism. So because, as you might know, Beuys always kind of, presented himself as a kind of shaman. And so I thought this could be a good link actually to talk about new kinds of shamanistic practices in the context of this Beuys birthday party, let's say. So that's what we did. And I always tell people, okay, don't get me wrong, it's not a Beuys exhibition, but it's an exhibition about contemporary art. And I really wanted to understand why it is that younger generations of artists are interested in things or practices like shamanism, or the return of rituals, or another word that you just mentioned, this whole issue of healing. You hear it so much nowadays. Also topics like animism or spiritual practices. It's a huge return of these let's call them practices, and I was really intrigued by this. I've been following this for several years, and now it was time to turn it into an exhibition. So there's only 12 positions in the exhibition. One of them is Beuys. But also when I invited artists, I found it very interesting that they said, well, we just hope that we won't be framed like we are doing this because there was boys before us. Very interesting. And they said, like, I mean, the reasons why we work in a way we work, also when you think about Transformella, Johannes Paul Räther, or also Mariechen Danz, there's a lot of a whole world of other inspirations or influences that they rework into their projects. And I found it interesting that there was a kind of this reservation not to be put in that context too much, which I think is very, very reasonable, let's say. So the exhibition, to make things really brief, is divided into 4 chapters. The first chapter, I called it Alchemy and Metallurgy. It's very much looking at, let's say, metals, metals, but also matter, like carbon, like Transformella, for example, is looking at the carbon cycle, or groups like Nobotic are looking at gold. Gold is, of course, also very present in Beuys' work. So, I mean, from every work in the exhibition, you can make very direct links to Beuys' practice, but without, you know, positioning, without claiming that there is a direct link in a way. So, Nobotic, obviously, as they have a really interesting project they are presenting. It's called Swiss Psychotropic Gold. And they look at the role of Switzerland in the global gold trade. And Christian Hübler, who is one member of Nobotic, he told me when I was asking him, like, why did they start the project? And he said, well, there was this one moment when people told us, or some people told us, that in Zurich, there's people who are meditating on gold nuggets naked. So it's not nuggets, but those what is it called? Goldbarren.
Bars.
Gold bars, yes. So this image really really intrigued them. Like, why? What is it? Also, what connects the myth of neutrality of Switzerland to this very specific qualities of this metal? And in how far is the process of purification of gold, or the chemical process, the alchemical process you have to undergo, in how much is this affecting also in a way the country? Because as they found out, it's like 70% of the global gold trade and the refining of gold is going through and happening in Switzerland. So that's a very, very interesting link they are creating. The second chapter is, it's actually a quite big chapter in the exhibition. It's called Cosmology. It is really about the link between microcosm, macrocosm, and there's a lot of talking about space, and also those new plans of private space industry, let's say, also connected to Silicon Valley, obviously. Susan Treaster just made or completed a new series called Techno-Shamanic Systems, without knowing that we were planning this exhibition, inspired by actually those grandiose statements of Donald Trump. Maybe you remember he at some point published a decree which was allowing anybody to start mining on the moon, and to start this process of extractivism, which has put the earth in the state it is in to kind of expand this practice of extractivism into space and into the cosmos. Susie Triester, she started this new series because of this decree, but also because of people like Elon Musk, who are like kind of now bringing Silicon Valley or transhumanism into space. Third chapter is ecology and sorry, I have to add one thing about cosmology. Another position in the cosmology chapter is, for example, Anton Widokle, who I'm sure you're aware of this trilogy. He made this film trilogy about Russian cosmism, which is a super interesting philosophical movement before and after the revolution, which I now could talk about for 2 hours at least, but I won't. Maybe we can, I can bring this in later in the discussion. So the third chapter is ecology and / artificial intelligence, because we have several projects in the exhibition that link these two issues. And the fourth chapter is also quite present. It's a chapter I call non-human actors or non-human agents. This can be animals, or this can be mythological characters, and so on. And something I noticed throughout all the positions in the exhibition, this renewed interest in rituals, or in something you might call shamanism, or even witches or animism or spiritual practices. It's really not about improving the individual, right? Because there's a large trend of, you know, I'm missing the word right now, but there obviously is a very large trend, which is a very neoliberal tendency, which uses all of these kinds of practices in order to, you know, improve the individual. But most of the, or many, let's say all of the positions in the exhibition, they're really about creating new forms of being together, or of collectivity, or they try to, you know, project, they try to think about or open up spaces that allow us to think about new forms of collectivity or of family or of gathering. And that's what I find quite remarkable in these projects. So yes, maybe a last sentence about, because I was really, I really had this kind of research focus. I really started with an open question, like why is there this return to these kinds of practices or beings in the world, let's say. And I think for me, one answer would be that basically we have come to a situation on this planet which mainly was caused by capitalism, or you could also say that's the outcome of, in a way, rational thinking. And somehow I think there's this urge to find other ways to connect to each other, but also to connect to the world around us. And that's one of the answers I found for myself. Certainly there are more. So that was my little input.
Okay, thanks a lot for this overview. It gave like a frame for also for OMSK work in a way. That's a bigger movement, so to say, historically also. Thanks. And Martin, please, the stage is yours.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much for your very interesting insights. It's really interesting because I was more into historical questions the last time, but it's really interesting to see what today is happening and how things are today thought out. So thank you very much for your insights. And Martina, thank you for having me again, of course. So I also have a more short input maybe regarding my point of view. As you know, Martina, I'm writing a book at the moment about the influence of cybernetic theories on society and our self-understanding. What this influence in fact means for the concept of subjectivity, how these cybernetic theories influence the counterculture and their beings, and how this counterculture then was commercialized and played an important role, still plays an important role with its emancipatory claims connected to the perception of digital technologies. You mentioned the work, the important work of Fred Turner. However, my view is slightly different than his, but I also think his work is important. And in particular, I like to stress 2 points. Firstly, I think one has to look very closely on the specific Be-in practices and their goals when talking about the counterculture, because I think that there were quite different approaches and goals maybe. For instance, Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters maybe were different to the computer counterculture later. Or to Timothy Leary's Be-ins, they were not friends so much. And I would argue that it is too simple to subsume that they all had the same ideas and goals or embodied performances, how you would call it. On top of that, even the famous and so-called protagonists may have changed their mind over the years in quite fundamental ways. And regarding this, external factors like economy and so on should also not be forgotten, maybe. As you pointed out, Martina, Be-ins became a quite cool business till today. So roughly speaking, maybe one could say there were two, in fact, more countercultures, but maybe to keep it simple, let's talk about two. One that commercialized itself and embraced the opportunity to meld with a kind of counterculture marketing, as one could say. You can see this prominently, for instance, in famous ads like Apple's introduction of the Macintosh in 84, or in the rhetoric of the new economy and so on. This emancipatory claims of democratizing technology and so on. Regarding this emergence of the emancipatory and liberal values of the counterculture with the strictly economical neoliberal values of the neoconservatives, the sociologists Barbrook and Cameron coined the term Californian Ideology. What connects both sets of values, their lowest common denominator, so to say, is then their anti-state attitude, but not much more. On the other hand, there are people in counterculture who stayed with their liberal and emancipatory values and didn't commercialize them. But in fact, they are mostly not so well known or don't get the same attention because they didn't stay successful when the early days were over. They didn't stage high-tech Be-ins or launch Apple and so on. And they didn't even try to do so because they weren't interested in. They might have contributed some important ideas to the counterculture and even to the development of technologies, but then they just disappeared, like the pranksters, for instance. And in art, respectively media art, it might be similar in a way. I don't know so exactly about that, but I can imagine. because in this regard, we shouldn't forget the influence of Cold War cultural politics and the role of many of the more famous artists in it. So to keep it short, the counterculture was heavily influenced by cybernetic ideas developed in the labs of the Cold War, a military, industrial, academic complex. And soon after it became a big movement, its development showed for many how countercultures can be used to make money with countercultural claims, as they allow to form a more diverse society with more diverse lifestyles, consuming more diverse products, and so on, the neoliberal way, so to say. But I also think it is worth to think about a re-examination of the forms of cybernetic selves the 60s counterculture firstly have created, in my eyes, but now with the reflection about the backgrounds of cybernetic in the military industrial complex. And this reflection was not strong back then. So we know more today. We have more historical backgrounds, more research was done, and a historical informed view is needed, so to say, from my point of view, which also reflects on the darker or mythopian sides, instead of simply repeating the sometimes quite naive hopes from back then, and explore, nevertheless, in embodied form, those selves created back then. Therefore, the OMSK was very interesting for me. However, Timothy Leary, for instance, was soon not opposed by the transhumanist, as far as I know. So much from my side. I try to keep it short, within 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, I will go back to gallery option so that we are together virtually, at least. Thanks a lot, Martin, for the historical contextualization. Now we have some figures popping up from the 60s and being transported to today. Yeah, before I go with my questions or whatever, I would like to ask if you have questions for each other or comments or whatever.
Yeah, I really would be interested in the OMSK idea of dematerialization, as I come from a school of media theory, which is quite materialistic, Berlin School of Media Studies. So this idea would be interesting to me, how you think about that, and the cryptocurrency thing. So because I really try to stay away from it, so to say, I have no clue or no idea about it. And so I wouldn't be able to take part in one of your sessions, or how does it work? So am I excluded, so to say, or
No, no, it's never too early to start. Like,
but I have to start. Okay.
Well, just in that one instance of a work that we did with Media Group and Bitnix, which was basically a crypto rave series, which ran 5 times, I think, which basically looked at because thinking about this bleed space is always really important with the works, to not only be rooted in entirely an imaginary sense, but also to explore fundamentally like what those structures or concepts would mean in terms of like the everyday world. So within this structure of the crypto rave, which was basically an idea about asking the question of what would happen if we could find like a decentralized funding model to put on collective happenings, which I mean, I guess really actually sits quite sweetly within this notion of being. because basically, actually, what it was like an 8-hour rave where people like Crystal Mess, Amnesia Scana, Bill Cooligas, like peers played. But what was different about it just being a rave was the fact that there was, for each work, around 300 tickets that were open to the public, but the public had to mine the ticket for 8 hours, which means that if you wanted to attend, you had to open up this crypto rave Monero mining unit, which at the time, Monero was the only cryptocurrency that could be mined through various interlocking, so chained computers that are just normal domestic level, like every computer that we're on right now could be actually mining Monero crypto. There was a really interesting project called Bail Block that came out where basically people were running Monero mining units in the background of their everyday computer use to create funding systems to aid prisoners in America in getting out and starting their lives back up. So it was the same mining unit and the same code, but we were using it to put on these decentralized raves. But as they were mining the Monero, after the first hour, they would get like the lineup. After the second hour, you would get your unique character, which had your sort of false name, your traits, your behaviors, your incentive for going there, your belief structures in terms of the whole cryptographic scene. After the third hour, you would get a reader, which mapped the from the very early movement of the internet to, you know, the potential of Web3. And so sort of every hour something is revealed to you that then kind of gives you this starter pack for entering this world. And you could gather all of this together, and then you could go to a workshop and meet other people who were going to be present. And then you would turn up on the night fully kind of incognito to this world, being the crypto rave. And this also kind of utilizes a really interesting dynamic within the rave scene or the rave landscape, because like for example, when we did it in Barcelona, you know, there is actually a huge hacking scene there, which very much built these technologies, and they were present. But of course, like, you know, the everyday art goer, because it was connected to CCB and the Influencers Festival, like wouldn't at all recognize this group. So you had like people explaining what they thought emergent technologies and decentralization was to people who are very much active in the field, and sort of like a lot of cross-contamination and trying to sort of realize or work out what is pure myth, what is understanding, and yeah, how do you negotiate that together? So, and also, you know, really what I think is kind of interesting as well is this moment when you realize the sense of construction that occurs and the roles that we actually play, like not only in our working labor life, which I think has been very systematically theorized about the roles that we play, whether that be, you know, the worker, the artist, the carer, the lover, you know, these are all roles that we manifest, but I think we don't necessarily see them in our off time or in these subcultural spaces. So I think this also kind of unpacks a different layer. And maybe that also sort of leads me onto this notion of dematerialization, which in my understanding is like defined by the reduction of qualities that sort of serve economic functions, or that they decline over time. like through the mass materials that are used to almost kind of augment an industrial end of production. And I think in terms of these worlds, they're extremely fragile. Like they're there for like a fleeting second. But what is left over, this kind of immateriality, this liminality, the almost sort of shadow, can very quickly become a departure point for the next leg of materialization. Does that make sense?
Yeah, things get fluid in a way, more and more in the space of ideas, and it would be education for me to be part in such a kind of rave. It's interesting. I was also playing a rave, was DJing for long years, but in Berlin and stuff some years ago. So I know about the intermingling of computer freaks and techno freaks and stuff like that. Was not only doing high culture music, but also stuff like that. So, but I wondered about the cryptocurrency thing just, but makes sense. It would have educated me, so to say. If I want to be part, then I learn something about cryptocurrencies, which are also used in good projects, or like you explained, so to add prisoners and stuff. And so it's another dimension of that world I'm not aware of, maybe, or with your briefings or the roles you give, it's like to me seems like an invention to try change role and reflect on that, or as I understand it now from your explanation.
Totally. I mean, also I think that it's roleplay is just a really magnificent way of opening up kind of difficult or black boxed ideas. And I think, yeah, definitely within like that specific project was very much about the strong belief that the everyday public needs to also have accessibility in order to understand like the ways in which these technologies are very much shaping our world. And like, as somebody who I think definitely studies emergent technologies, what I've begun to notice is that they don't go away. They fork, they mutate, they evolve, they de-evolve, but they don't disappear. And I mean, these works that we did around cryptocurrencies were about 2017. And I mean, now, you know, just where we are sitting right now, having this conversation, and there, like, war has broken out. And one of like the strongest methodologies of like getting money into that country has become very much through crypto, that there is, you know, huge Bitcoin and Ethereum cash flows going into Ukraine, which cannot be led or reserved by a sovereign body. And, you know, this kind of opens up, and these cash donations, they're from, you know, everyday people as well. And I think, yeah, it's really about looking at these ideas and seeing, yeah, how accessible are they? How do we begin to negotiate them? How do we fight ourselves a little bit? Because I mean, definitely, I confess, I'm also suspicious and not always open to new things, and so, which I think is very healthy. But I think that there is maybe a time and a space of us being able to examine those. And I do strongly believe that arts and culture and, yeah, thinking has like that place that we can do that in a safe and maybe moderated and not maybe not in like a conclusive way, but maybe more, as you said, like in this fluid way, so that we can begin to practice what we want to achieve through these ideas or methodologies or technologies before like we go out into the real world. I mean, that's sort of actually kind of a lot of gamer theory, that they believe that, you know, if we could play all the world's problems before we actually applied them to political gestures, we might actually get a lot quicker to a place of sanity and care, because we can press reset, but you can't press reset on the world as it's moving. I think I might have detoured that, sorry.
Well, to me, I just had this connection to anarcho-capitalism with cryptocurrencies. So I think there's strong support of that, or I'm in my understanding, they are close to these ideas. So, and this is really neoliberalism in square, so to say. And so I was a bit suspicious about them. And also there's the environmental aspect of the question of energy, just to mine, yeah, to mine them. But I've heard there are better ones and more worse ones and stuff. I just had no time to really figure it out, and so thanks.
I have two questions to OMSK Social Club. First one, I have always been very intrigued about OMSK. And my question would be, have you been to OMSK? Because I have been to OMSK. And I would like to know where does the name come from? The second question, I was very, very intrigued by this notion of the bleed. And I was wondering, like, isn't this something that is happening like almost on an everyday basis? Isn't this a very common phenomenon? And then at the same time, I thought, like, isn't this what all art is doing? Like when I'm reading literature, when I'm reading, I don't know, Thomas Pynchon, Gravity's Rainbow, this definitely affects me. Yeah, this doesn't leave me unchanged. So that's just the thoughts I had concerning the bleed, which I think is a great notion.
Thanks for the question. Just to briefly speak about the name, no, OMSK does not come from Omsk as a landscape necessarily, or geographical landscape, but it's like a little bit a long story, but basically Omsk is actually taken from this quote that Dostoevsky, of course, spent time in Omsk due to the literature, which is super nice that you actually brought that in terms of bleed, because of course, one of the very first methodologies or definitely understandings that we had of bleed was within literature, where you actually physically place yourself in the position of the protagonist in order to flow or be composed by the narration. But actually, Dostoevsky declared his time in Omsk as actually being buried alive for his fiction, because he was put into the forced work labor camps for his imagination. And this due to the kind of immersive practice, and also because a lot of the worlds that we create, they're actually not that easy to deal with. There is a lot of difficulty that's particularly resonated, but also moved and shifted between the collective of participants. And I think that's also really important to note, even in terms of like rave scenes or psychedelic use, that, you know, there is extreme euphoric highs, but then there's also extreme lows. but they are treated with the openness, like whether you're going there with kisses or scars, like there's a negotiation in those spaces that offer both. And I think that's also very much what we try to do. So in a sense, this is sort of encapsulated within the OMSK context. And then social clubs are actually, because most of us were based from the UK or growing up in the UK, in the north of England, we have social clubs, which are basically pubs, but you have to have a membership for them. And they are particularly prominent in working class neighborhoods. And they function as spaces of, in a sense, entertainment, but also politics, but not necessarily in this like demonstrative politics, but more like, so my gran used to say that basically the reason why the UK is fucked is because they closed all the pubs and nobody had any place to talk anymore. And so sort of social clubs really play these like very strong role in that. And so sort of like utilizing these two notions was like where the name came from. And actually the name of Social Club wasn't originally to do with the arts at all. It was very much supposed to be a left-wing anarchist project space that actually began to be formulated in around 2009 in Berlin. And the quest for it really fell under the bridge of gentrification and the struggles of this group of people. And because, yeah, this seemed to be something that never equated, but there was like a lot of hope and crossover between what this space could achieve. And so it seemed appropriate not to allow it to die, but to allow it to manifest in different form. And so that's where the name comes from. And yeah, I mean, you're completely right. For a lot of artworks, and even very much so literature, but even if we think about things like music, I mean, as somebody who come from the UK, you know, music inspired greatly, like also philosophy and theory. You know, Mark Fisher's Burial wouldn't have been possible without Bleed, because, you know, he speaks completely about walking through the streets, and the music in his ears is really where he is philosophizing from. And that, of course, is a bleed. It's like a socio-emotional bleed. And these kind of bleeds
This meeting is being recorded.
I'm not sure what happened there.
It's good that you're back. We were a bit shocked.
I don't know. It was like timed out or something. Good job this is not live. But yeah, basically, where was it? Yeah, this kind of sense of bleed can like very much manifest in this psychosis space, but also, you know, it registers as sort of like an environmental empathy or like hypnotic suggestion. Yeah, which I think is also really interesting in terms of, I was lucky enough to see the Technoshamanism exhibition. And I think in terms of sort of methodologies or understanding like the extraction of symbology and iconography and feelings, that this for me is like very much induced in this shamanistic sense, whether that be from witches or techies, that, you know, there is a sort of expectation or emotional status that is extracted from the shaman and in dosages. And from that, you can actually begin to maybe slow down sort of time and space and be able to really kind of poke and prod. And I mean, that's what I also really enjoyed from the exhibition itself. I mean, I have to say that even watching Joseph Beuys's work with the coyote, I mean, this in this setting was actually very lucid for me as a viewer, because I guess also the modus of knowing many of the other artists personally, and then having this like very fundamental foundation or base, or like, I mean, you spoke about metals earlier, and I think it's like that piece is almost like the base metal, and then like, you know, the alchemy that follows of the future years of cultural workers and producers. And yeah, I think I would also really love to go back to maybe to speak both of you about this idea of what rituals can do in terms of bringing viewers or readers together. Like, do you think that they're, like, from a curational or narrational position, like how does ritual play into that?
Well, one thing I just want to add, I don't want to disturb your question. I have to keep it in mind, but one thing maybe connects a bit to it. I really thought too that both of your approaches seem to have kind of mythological, or it's a kind of mythological approach, shamanism and the dematerialization and the aliens speaking, McKenna's aliens speaking through LSD to us and stuff like that. So it kind of has mythological connotations. At the same time, the technology which is connected to it is really very mechanistic in a way, and is like the antipole or to those mythological understandings. And this is somehow interesting to me, that's really these two sides connected so closely together. And yeah, maybe your question pointed also to the question of collectives, or to come together. There also one may ask how those selves coming together, how they are constituted. I think there are different ways how it might be thought out that these selves are constituted. So in OMSK, I've heard a quite radical constructivistic approach when I was listening, right? What is reality, and all those questions? Does it exist, or is it just an illusion? And while at the same time we live on a Mother Earth who with all the extractionism Inke was talking about. So with real problems, not constructed problems, but real fundamental problems. And I don't know how you see the selves. That I would be interested in, because maybe this also affects the idea of ritual and get together. How are the selves constituted? So each self is like for itself kind of illusion machine, and all those illusion machines meet, and then they find a consensus in a way, in a kind of mythological, symbolic worlds, using technology which is very materialistic in a way? Or what kind of picture of the self is behind those ideas? And also the shamanistic, when I was not lucky to see the exhibition, unfortunately, but I found the name also really interesting, because it points in the same direction somehow. Yeah, I found both of your approaches, they are interconnected in a way. So just to mention, or just to add to your question.
I don't want to stop the question, but this would be my question too, or my observation with it in Inke and OMSK. There was very important new forms of collectivity, say goodbye to the individualism, and to be integrated in a form of collective, which is not without hierarchies. And Inke's question for the exhibition was why we have shamanistic movements coming back in our today's situation of so-called Anthropocene, or Capitolocene, how we will call it, but in a moment of destruction, which is linked to technology. And as Martin said, now we are looking like for technology to get another meaning, another value, and as another option. And why I think it's so important to have, and why I asked in the introduction for the historical background, and Martin brought in some facts and ideas about the background. There's one side, as we got to know about the economic question, yeah, that's this neoliberal transhumanist, that the hippie and the counterculture could be seen as a new business. This is one side. For me, the interesting side is the question of mentality. And I think we are speaking about mentality in the works of Technoshamanism and in the works of OMSK. This is an attitude to the world, the question of subjectivity, as Martin brought it in now. And my, so to say, problem is I'm very fascinated and attracted, and I'm very caution. This is like me being between Antonin Artaud and Bertolt Brecht. I'm such a schizophrenic person, because there's Mary Prankster group, there is the movement in the 1960s of experiments in art and technology, David Tudor, who was in spiritist movements, there's Gerd Stern, they had been very linked to Buddhism, and this nobilization in a way of technology to be able to bring us like in LSD states. This was their aim, that it was not to give LSD to people, but to give technology, to give psychedelic environments created by technology. And it was said that this environment, and this was in a way Martin's question, how to bring together shamanism, rituals, all this spiritual and spiritist worlds with technology. Yeah, so that we could have another use of technology to get rid of the subject, which is not the best idea since modern times, and to come to new forms of collectivity. And at the same time, there is this kind of nobilization in a way of technology, which is also always coming from military contexts. And it's another world, it's a work of mechanic, of counting, and all these systems of capitalism, economy, who make bad things in a way with technology. And when we come back now in this situation where we have made a whole of shit as human beings, as a subject, as we are the greatest, we can take the earth no matter what, and colonial stuff, that they are better and not so good humans, and yeah, all these bad things we did with the subject and with technology. We come back to a movement from the 1960s, but with this kind of mentality. And for me, it's now a situation where we are like in a post-human situation. I'm not fan of post-human and of this emphatic idea. Post-human for me is a kind of techno-human cooperativity. Now we have, intelligent or not, but we have artificial intelligence deciding and acting, giving us access via Google to knowledge and so on. So this techno-human connectivity, cooperativity and connectivity is now entangled with these ideas from the 1960s of Technoshamanism, technology as way to make us better humans, to give us other ideas of another world, to give us ideas about other forms of collectivity, a more justice society, and more attention to the earth, to the environment. And so this is my question, or my yes, and my Arthur Brecht situation. Yes, we have to find solutions. Yes, there are possibilities. But if we go to this prehistory of Be-in from the 1960s, there's always also this mentality, or this mentality of the 1960s is now coupled with this techno-human existence, this techno-human entanglement and cooperativity. May it be that we don't see the hegemonial aspects, and can the methods of shamanism, of rituals, fight against this not so good and hegemonial technocratic side, or is it a danger? Is this a problem? You know what I mean? But this is what I try to call the ambivalences. So yes, and Arthur and Brecht, yes, and caution. But it's so interesting, this renaissance of the methods and mentalities of the 1960s. And of course, we need to change the systems. But yeah, the question perhaps is Martin's idea, bringing together technology and the human. Is there, where do we go with it? Yeah, sorry, but I didn't want to interrupt your question, but it was a question about the ritual in a way.
No, but it also helped me quite a lot to, you really focused things, because one can read it as a retreat to transcendental ideas or something, this mythological points of view in a world where transcendental ideas are in fact deconstructed completely by technology. That would be a standpoint from my side. So what kind of mixture is that? So I wonder about this strong transcendental aspects on the one side, where we have, because the OMSK video thing was very interesting also, because you know, the MK Ultra thing. So they did experiments with Ken Kesey was part of it. So therefore, I also think the pranksters are a bit different from Leary and USCO in their approach, because he wrote that book. He worked in this psychiatric hospital, and he found the drugs there. He was they used him as guinea pig, or as and so maybe he had another view, I would suggest, than some others. But the thing your art thing with a video on LSD and with the 8 participants. It reminded me on those videos you find on YouTube where military gives people LSD, or and they try to how can we, the idea behind it was under the influence of cybernetic theories, how can we decipher the human brain as a machine? So that was the idea behind it, to do those kind of experiments, and to sit a lot of researchers in the labs and give people those kind of drugs. And now you do the same as an art performance. So this kind of strikes me. This is very interesting, yeah. And I also think technology doesn't go away. So and those scenes are very not only iconic in the sense of, okay, there was the counterculture, but they are really there's more about them. And so I also think we have to go through this cybernetic view and to go on from there, because we can't take the time back or go to the 40s or 30s back again. It's not possible. So thanks, Martina. It helped me to focus it maybe a bit more. And of course, the question about the rituals and the come together, about community is important. How can it work? And what kind of view onto the world and onto maybe new views can be born out of such experiments and role play actions. And I hope so. I would hope so. So
maybe I can jump in, Inke, and then I'll let you follow on. Just a few, maybe trying to respond, but also just a clarification. One, the work that we did was definitely not in highly restrained MK Ultra experiment style, which interestingly, actually, we did work for around 5 hours with the use of trancing, visualization, and some somatic work as a group before we even left to the forest where we did this experience. So we were outside throughout, and we were also methodologically filling in interpersonal charts, like measuring the discrepancy of feeling, questions that were going into our heads and things like this. So it was actually much more positioned within the notion of collective experimentation and guiding each other, rather than like this kind of more, I guess, institutional approach of like watching how psychedelics interfere or disturb the mind. But I think that was my fault. I didn't really mention that before. And I thought it was kind of interesting the way that you both spoke to this idea of like this sort of repurposing the individual into collectivity. I think like within the notion of role play, the individual is still super strong. The difference is that the individual is made up of 2 people. It's made up of the character that they're given to play out, which may have similarities. It may also have opposites, or it may have something distasteful that then later on by the player is empathized, solidified, and repurposed. So it's almost just sort of layering of 2 selves. And also what's kind of interesting is that in the choreography of these 2 individuals as one person, that in order for the landscape of storytelling and narration to occur, that does actually have to be hierarchy of story. But the thing is that it becomes dissolvable. So it's not a traditional trajectory of one hierarchical authority gets to say like what is reality and what is not, but instead there's this very kind of nuanced tools that are used by the group in order to agree without breaking play. Like, I mean, obviously it would be like really random if you're like, oh yeah, but like actually in this world we don't have cars. Like then you kind of cut the magic of it in a way. So you have to sort of like, yeah, utilize or sort of dance almost with these narratives and these topics. And so, yeah, I think like a strong part of negotiating these worlds is very much to learn and adapt to the idea of dissolvable hierarchy, to the switch point between individual and collective. And also not to forget that hierarchy also has the potential to empower. You know, there is a moment where we have a certain skill set or we have a certain set of knowledges which can actually be really beneficial to a situation and can really kind of bring it to more fruition. And so I think this is very much exploring all of those things. And what I really do want to kind of underline is this notion of exploring, because like Social Club as an art practice is very much an exploratory practice. And I think that also brings on to this question of like, yeah, these are imaginative worlds in real world problems. And part and parcel of all of the works is to look at those problems, but not really assume that a solution can be found that we can pin as an absolute. You know, it's about finding certain sets of solutions or tools that then can be brought out and examined further. And that takes years and years. It's not something that you can like you can manifest in a few hours or even a few weeks. And I think this also like really leads on to maybe, and hopefully Inke, you can build on this like further, but this idea of like why ritual now plays like a very strong role. Without ritual, we wouldn't be able to get into those worlds, because there's something extremely specific about the human body and about being able to participate as a performance and to collectivize and go through certain sets of systems that allow us to change and moderate landscape. And I think these are very, very archaic tropes that we have consciously enabled ourselves to do. And I also just want to be like a little bit cautious in this idea that like it's a return to the spiritual. Because if we look at sort of what's also being kind of uncovered in art history of like methodologies, even as like early as like Kandinsky and abstraction, expressionism, which were of course in essence like tropes that obscured reality, the same as psychedelics, the same as alchemy, the same as the occult. Actually, those art critics at the time, they very much pushed against the lineage or the academy of the spiritual when reading and visiting those early works. And so really this notion of spirituality was pushed away from the arts in a staunch criticism that only talks about the rationale. And so I'm not totally sure, but I'm not sure if it ever went away. I think that like maybe there was like more of these nuances of spirituality that were just unarchived. And I think that's also like in terms of technology, you know, the moderation of consciousness and belief in something other, like has actually been intrinsically part of a lot of these communities that were developing technology, but they were similarly not models that sold things or maybe set to this I think it was Martina who said about like, you know, capitalism could be constructed also as rational thinking. And yeah, I think like, yeah, these parts of these lineages were kind of quite nicely slipped under the carpet because they didn't really fit too well into that societal view at that point. But maybe, Inge, I'm sure you probably know way more about this than me.
No, I mean, I think this idea of returning to something, I think it's wrong. I don't think it's a return to something, a return to transcendental ideas or maybe the spiritual. I mean, there have been a lot of books also about the spiritual in art, you know, especially dealing with the historical avant-garde. And this was not a movement that, you know, emerged from rationality. No, it was a very, very spiritual. I mean, Kandinsky and, you know, Malevich, it had a lot of spiritual roots. Another thing that nicely connects to what you just said, OMSK Social Club, is actually, it's a project I just saw again today. It's a project called the Quantification Trilogy by Jeremy Shaw, in which it's like, the films look like documentaries, like black and white documentaries from the 1960s, but obviously they're not. I mean, the whole narrative that you listen to, it's like the whole story is set in the future when the human body has been enhanced with machine DNA to a certain percentage, and people try to kind of reconnect to something kind of spiritual that somehow has been lost, and they do it through rituals, through amazing rituals. And the shape of the films themselves, they allow you to participate in these kinds of rituals and these bodily rituals. It's totally, I'm still quite I mean, I experienced that again today. It's a really interesting film trilogy, this work, where all of these topics, where all of these issues come together in a way. I mean, it's like a crystallization of all of these issues, where technology and ritual, looking back, looking to the future, this also gets like crisscrossed, you know, looking back at the 60s, but no, actually, no, this is the future.
Yeah, I really like the idea of embodiment and embodied role play, because I think this adds a very important dimension, which otherwise couldn't be reached, and which has a lot to do with developing points of view who stress care and stuff like that. So to me, body is essential. So therefore, I really like this embodiment strategies. And I also have known raves where bodies were dancing together, and there is another spirit. So it's you can't deny it. So it does something. Yeah, it's and it does different things than theory or rationalization or scientific research and stuff like that. No question about that.
I think what is making my revolt or my in between those, like Artaud, Brecht, these are, it's a bit stupid, but these are like all the sides we could have, like the spiritual, the things between the earth and the sky we don't know, and I understand the idea that something comes back, the return, because it has always been both or much more than both in our culture and in our history, and that there are other kinds of knowledge of being together. I'm very, very with it and very attracted to it. And also, yeah, in my experience as a performer, I had some experiences of whatever, I don't know, making like ritual repetitive movements. And suddenly I was in a state of being, I don't know what it was, but it was beyond everything. And I had another kind of being with the world, and this is still in me, and I'm going with it, I'm living with it. So I think and this is very rich, and we have to keep, it's like a gift. So I think for me the problem is if it comes to discourses and if we don't, that we have to have the historical side to see prehistories and what happens, and then, for example, the work of Fred Turner is very important to see how it was a prehistory of transhumanist right-wing movements of Silicon Valley, technocratic spirit, and so on, and to see the discourses or the situation of digital cultures, what I call the cooperativity. So if we need now human agents who are able to submit and to be obedient to care technology, me coming to the age of being very old soon and to have a robot to take care of me, because my son is not so interested in that perhaps, and he should not, then it would be great to train my robot so that I have conversations with him as we have now. So that would be a dream. But yeah, then I need something perhaps like OMSK Social Club said, like two characters or two individuals, or being able to forget myself, to go with the flow or whatever. So this is the technological and techno-economical, not ecological, but economical situation we are in, so that we have a very aware and not critical in a sense to make everything bad, but informed something sensible for this gift, which is very fragile and so rich, but what it could be. Yeah, of course, we also in Germany have this history of fascism, so we have to think about all this and to make it very clear. And therefore, I'm so very grateful to OMSK Social Club to be very clear in what kind of subject, what kind of collectivity, the pro and contra of hierarchy, and so on. So to be very precise and very not sophisticated, very precise and diverse. Yeah, I don't know the English word. Yeah, and to see the richness of all the things we try to put under the carpet, unter den Teppich, because they are strange, because they can make us blow away our minds or whatever. So yeah, we need exhibitions like Technoshamanism, and we need the work of OMSK Social Club, absolutely. And we need Martin and me to think about history and the discourses.